A convoy of dump trucks reverses onto a dead field in southern Costa Rica and starts unloading garbage. Wet, sticky, rotting fruit pulp, the slimy red skins left over after coffee beans are stripped out of the cherry. Truck after truck, 30 loads in total, until the ground disappears under a layer of decomposing waste about half a meter deep. It stinks. It attracts flies. If you drove past it, you would assume you were looking at illegal dumping, the kind of thing that gets a company fined. The scientists who organized it then walked 20 meters to the side, marked out an identical patch of the same dead ground, and did absolutely nothing to it. 2 years later, they came back to compare the two. The plot they had buried under coffee waste was covered by a young forest, small trees, closing overhead, shading the ground, roughly 80% canopy cover. The untouched plot beside it was still what it had been: grass. Dead flat pasture, with about 20% cover and almost nothing growing upward. The trees that had managed to appear in the treated plot were up to 4 times taller than anything in the control. Same soil, same climate, same seeds arriving on the same wind. One difference: one had been buried in trash. And the reason it worked is not the reason almost everyone guesses. The land in question was in Coto Bruce, in the south of Costa Rica, and it had a very common history for that part of the world. It had been cleared, generations ago, for farming and cattle pasture. Then it had been abandoned, because the soil was tired, or the economics changed, or the family moved on. So it sat there, empty, no longer farmed and not yet forest. Now, the intuitive assumption is that abandoned tropical land turns back into jungle on its own. Nature reclaims it. Give it 20 years and the forest walks back in. Sometimes that is true. Very often it is not. And this is one of the most frustrating problems in tropical restoration. When cattle pasture is created in the tropics, the grass planted for the animals is usually not native. Across Latin America, a great deal of pasture is planted, with tough African grasses that were selected precisely because they are aggressive, fast-growing, and able to survive heavy grazing and poor soil. Those qualities make them excellent for feeding cattle. They also make them almost impossible to get rid of. Once the cattle are gone, that grass does not politely step aside. It forms a dense, continuous mat that grows fast, holds the ground, and outcompetes almost everything else. A tree seed landing on that surface has a serious problem. It may not reach soil at all. If it germinates, the seedling is immediately shaded and crowded by grass that grows far faster than it does, and it is choked out before it gets anywhere. The grass also dries out in the dry season and burns readily, and fire kills young trees while the grass simply regrows from its roots. The result is a condition ecologists call arrested succession. The land is stuck. It is not farmland, and it is not forest, and left alone it can stay that way for decades. Millions of hectares of degraded former pasture across the tropics sit in exactly this state, doing very little, growing almost nothing, holding almost no carbon, and supporting almost no wildlife. You can fix it by hand. Restoration crews cut and clear the grass, plant nursery-grown native seedlings, and then weed around each one repeatedly for years until they are tall enough to shade the grass out themselves. It works, and it is how a great deal of serious reforestation is done. It is also extremely expensive and labor-intensive, which is why the amount of degraded tropical land actually being restored is a tiny fraction of the amount that exists. So the question researchers keep circling is whether there is something cheap that can break the grass and let a forest start on its own. And at the same time, somewhere else entirely, the coffee industry had a garbage problem. When coffee is processed, the part we drink is the seed. Around that seed is a fleshy fruit, the cherry, and in wet processing that fruit is stripped off and thrown away. What is left is coffee pulp, and the volume of it is enormous. A coffee mill running through a harvest generates mountains of the stuff. It is wet, it is heavy, it is acidic, and it rots fast. Historically, a lot of it went into rivers, and that is genuinely destructive. Dumping large quantities of rotting organic matter into a waterway causes bacteria to bloom and strip the oxygen out of the water, which suffocates fish and everything else living in it. Coffee pulp discharge has been a real pollution problem in coffee-growing regions for a long time. Mills compost it, spread it on fields, or simply pile it up, and there is always more of it than anyone knows what to do with. Two problems then: land that will not turn back into forest, and an agricultural waste product nobody wants. And it is worth appreciating how much land is at stake here, because this is not a niche issue. Across the tropics, the amount of cleared, abandoned, degraded former farmland runs into enormous figures. It is land that has already been deforested, so nobody has to be persuaded to give up a standing forest to restore it. It is often nobody's idea of valuable property. It produces almost nothing. If even a fraction of that ground could be pushed back toward forest cheaply, the effect on carbon storage, water, soil, and wildlife habitat would be very large. That is why researchers keep hunting for a low-cost trick, and why a result from 2 small plots in Costa Rica traveled as far as it did. In 2018, a team of researchers decided to put them together and actually measure what happened. The design was deliberately simple, because simple designs are the ones that convince people. 2 adjacent plots of degraded pasture, each roughly 35 by 40 meters. One buried under 30 dump truck loads of coffee pulp, about half a meter thick. The other left exactly as it was. Then wait, and watch, and take measurements. The results, published a couple of years later, were dramatic enough that the study traveled around the world. And what actually caused them is the part worth understanding. So if you want to know why burying land in garbage grew a forest when fertilizer would not have, take a moment to subscribe, because the mechanism is not what nearly everybody assumes when they hear this story. The obvious guess is nutrients. Coffee pulp is organic matter is fertilizer, fertilizer makes plants grow, therefore trees grew. Simple. That is not really it. In fact, if all you did was fertilize that land, you would probably have made things worse, because the thing best positioned to eat those nutrients is the aggressive pasture grass already sitting there. Feed a competitive grass and you get more competitive grass. The actual mechanism was physical. Half a meter of wet, dense, decomposing pulp is not a fertilizer layer. It is a blanket. It sat on top of the grass, and it smothered it. No light reached the grass, and it died, roots and all, under the weight and the heat of decomposition. For the first time in decades, that patch of ground had no grass mat on it. And then the pulp itself rotted away. Within about 2 years, it had largely decomposed and vanished, and what it left behind was bare, soft, enriched soil, with more carbon, more nitrogen, more phosphorus, and less compaction than the ground next door. In other words, an open seed bed in a landscape where seeds were already arriving constantly. Because that is the other half of it, seeds were never the problem. Birds and bats fly over abandoned pasture all the time and drop seeds from nearby forest. Wind carries others. That rain of seeds had been falling on that field for years and getting nowhere, because every single one landed on an impenetrable mat of grass. Clear the grass, and the seeds that were already coming finally had somewhere to land. The forest did not have to be planted. It had been trying to arrive the whole time and being blocked at the door. And once the first young trees get established, the process starts feeding itself. A small tree standing above grass is a perch, and a bird that lands on a perch leaves seeds beneath it. So the earliest trees become collection points that pull in more species, which grow into more perches, which pull in more seeds again. Shade from that growing canopy suppresses the grass further, which makes the ground even more hospitable to the next wave. What begins as a bare patch of enriched soil can flip into a self-reinforcing cycle, where each stage makes the following stage easier. The hard part was never the growing. The hard part was getting the very first generation past the grass. That is the elegant part of the result. It was not a fertility fix. It was the removal of an obstacle, using a waste product as a weapon against an invasive grass, and letting natural seed dispersal do the actual work of building the forest for free. And this was not the first time something like this had happened in Costa Rica. There is an earlier case that is even stranger, and it took 16 years and a lawsuit to find out how well it had worked. In the 1990s, an orange juice company operating near a conservation area in northwestern Costa Rica reached an agreement with ecologists. The company had huge quantities of orange peel waste. There was degraded former pasture that needed help. The deal was that the company would donate land to the conservation area, and in exchange it could dump its orange peel on a patch of that degraded ground. Around 1,000 truckloads went out, roughly 12,000 tons of orange peel spread over the dead pasture. Then a rival juice company sued, arguing this amounted to dumping industrial waste in a national park. The case went up to the Costa Rican Supreme Court, and the court ruled against the operation. The dumping was stopped, the agreement collapsed, and the site was quietly abandoned and largely forgotten for the better part of 2 decades. In the 2010s, researchers from Princeton went looking for it to see what had become of the ground. The story goes that one of them drove straight past the site on his first attempt because he was looking for a scarred waste dump, and what was actually there was thick, dark, closed canopy forest that looked nothing like the surrounding land. When they measured it properly and compared it with an untreated control area, the orange peel site had dramatically richer soil and far more above-ground biomass, on the order of well over 100% more, along with a much more diverse and structurally complex forest. A patch of ground that had been legally condemned as an act of pollution had, while nobody was watching, become the healthiest forest in the neighborhood. Same underlying principle. A thick layer of agricultural waste smothered the pasture grass, decomposed into rich soil, and let a natural forest establish itself. Now, the honest part, because this is a result that gets wildly oversold every time it goes viral, and the scientists who did the work have been careful in a way the headlines usually are not. First, and most importantly, the coffee pulp study was one small experiment. One treated plot and one control plot, each about the size of a few tennis courts, at a single site, followed for 2 years. That is a promising pilot, not a proven method. The researchers said so explicitly and called for larger and replicated trials. Anyone presenting this as an established solution is going further than the evidence does. Second, 2 years is a short time in the life of a forest. Fast early canopy cover is genuinely valuable, but whether that patch develops into a diverse, resilient, mature forest, or turns into a thicket dominated by a few fast-growing species, is a question that can only be answered by watching it for decades. Early growth is a good sign, not a final result. Third, and this is the limit that matters most in practice, it only works if seeds are arriving. The whole mechanism depends on removing the barrier so that natural seed dispersal can do its job. That requires remnant forest close enough for birds, bats, and wind to bring seeds in. On a vast expanse of degraded land with no forest for kilometers in any direction, you can smother all the grass you like and nothing much will come up, because there is nothing to come. Fourth, dumping a half-meter layer of rotting organic material has to be done carefully. Decomposition on that scale releases nutrients, and if it happens next to a stream, you have simply moved your pollution problem from the mill to the watercourse. Placement, slope, and distance from water are not optional details. And fifth, the arithmetic of scale is sobering. Half a meter deep is a lot of material. The total pulp output of a mill in a season covers a fairly modest area at that depth, and the waste has to be trucked to the site, which has its own cost and its own emissions. This is a good way to make use of waste that already exists near land that already needs help. It is not a mechanism for reforesting a continent. So what this actually is, stated fairly, is a genuinely clever and cheap tool that fits a specific situation. You have degraded pasture stuck under invasive grass. You have forest nearby supplying seeds, and you have an agricultural processing plant a short drive away producing organic waste it currently has to pay to get rid of. Where those 3 things line up, you can apparently turn a disposal cost into a forest, and the early evidence for that is striking. There is something quietly satisfying about the whole idea. Restoration is usually imagined as careful, expensive, high-skill work, nurseries and seedlings and crews with machetes. And then you get a result suggesting that in the right circumstances, one of the most effective things you can do for a dead field is back a line of trucks up to it and bury it in the garbage from a coffee mill. Nature was not waiting for us to plant it a forest. On that field in Costa Rica, it was waiting for someone to get the grass out of the way. 2 years after those 30 truckloads went down, the pulp was gone, the smell was gone, the flies were gone, and there were young trees closing over the ground. 20 meters away, on identical land that nobody had touched, the grass was still winning. If you enjoy true stories about the surprising ways nature comes back, stories most people never hear, then like this video and subscribe. In the next one, we will follow another place the world had already given up on. Take care of yourself and stay curious.